What is up, YouTube? Back in the garage. This is going to be a pretty packed full video, a lot to do. As you saw in the last video, or one of the last videos, I started tearing apart the GTI, so that's in the garage. And as I started tearing it apart, I kind of was deciding it's going to need a turbo, it's going to need rebuilt, and money was going to start adding up quick. So I decided to start looking for low mileage engines, and I went and picked up this low mileage engine right here. Out of a 2010 Volkswagen EOS, I think is how you say it. Same engine. It's got some of the older components on it. So I have a bunch of components from ECS tuning ready to swap over onto it just to make it a little bit more reliable and hopefully make it last a long time. So this engine has 26,000 miles on it, which is the part of the reason why I went and bought it. It did come with a 6-speed trans and whatnot. So I don't think I'm planning on swapping this to a manual. If you're looking for a low mileage 6-speed trans, I have one right here. So I didn't want to leave this thing in the garage too long, which is part of the reason why I went and just bought an engine. I'd like to get it back out of the garage. That way I can keep working on my MR2. And this thing's honestly about ready to get out of the garage so I can start data logging. So that's why I want to get this GTI done and over with and back on the road as quickly as possible. And this was the best way I could think to do that. So the good news for this video, I already have the engine ready to pull. So if we're lucky, I'm gonna get the engine pulled, get everything swapped onto the new engine that I need, get it freshened up, and then it's gonna go back in the car. So new engine should be swapped in this video. So I'm not gonna bore you guys. I didn't bore you guys with everything that it takes to get the engine out. There's plenty of videos already on the internet about that. Just to cover the, I guess, high points, I'm gonna try to pull it out of the top. So I have an engine leveler, which is going to be really helpful to try to get this thing out of the top. I actually haven't seen a video of that done. I've seen it out the front. I've seen it out the bottom if you have a lift, but I'm going to try and get this out the top, same way I usually pull an engine out of my Toyotas or whatever. So the high points of what you need to do, obviously you need to disconnect all the coolant hoses. I dropped the AC compressor off of the block, left all the lines hooked up, so that's just hanging from the chassis. Battery tray and intake all came out. The turbo on the backside, you have to unbolt the downpipe. So that downpipe kind of just slides off of the studs there, and that'll just stay where it's at, and the turbo will come out with it. The axles are unbolted and just kind of hanging there loose, so they'll just drop whenever the engine comes out the top. The wiring harness, you don't have to unhook anything on the engine. You can just pull the ECU out, unplug it from the ECU, and pull your harness up over and just pull that out with the engine, and then I'll just put it all on the engine outside of the car because that'll be 10 times easier, 100 times easier actually. There's just a few plugs down here for the transmission that are on a separate harness that you have to unplug. You got to unhook your starter wire, a ground wire on the transmission, some of that good stuff. I took off my hood to make sure I have enough clearance for my hoist to come up that high. There's a few coolant hoses over here that I disconnected. The heater hoses back here you have to disconnect. So now the engine is just kind of hanging by the two motor mounts. I got the dog bone on the bottom disconnected, and now this thing is kind of just hanging in there. So basically I'm ready to put tension on the hoist and unbolt the motor mounts on the side. So I'll just rip these bolts out here, and then what I'll do is I'll spin this to drop the transmission down. I'll lift the engine out up, and I just got to clear my brake master cylinder and all this good stuff over here. So I'm making it sound really easy. I did spend quite a few hours getting that all prepared, but let's go ahead and get this engine out. I forgot to disconnect my shifter cable for the DSG, so I'm gonna do that now. All right, guys, the engine's out. I went ahead and got the DSG transmission off of the engine that was in the car. That's because I will be reusing that. So now that that's out of the car, I want to go ahead and get the new engine ready because there's a lot of items to swap over and also new items to put on. So I'm going to start with the new items, but the first thing I need to do is go ahead and get all of this stuff I don't need off of this. I'm going to have some options on, components that I want to use from either my engine or this engine, depending on what's in good shape or not. There's a few like connectors that broke on this new engine whenever they, I guess, were taken out of the vehicle or whenever it was in the accident or whatever. So I'll be kind of mix and matching some of the sensors and whatnot. First thing to do is get the harness, intake manifold, everything off of this engine. So I'll just go ahead and do that. What up?
What up?
Got some friends smelling all of the brake clean here in the garage. Okay, so I got everything off of this engine, including the turbo, which wasn't a planned thing, and the turbo's off of the old engine, as you can see. So I ran into a little bit of an issue. So it was my own dumb mistake. Whenever I bought the engine, I saw it, and I didn't really think much of it. But here is what I just did. I have a solution, and it'll all be good. But here is what I found out. So this is the old turbo off of the old engine.
Okay.
And then this is the new turbo off of the 26,000 mile engine.
Okay.
So this turbo, the turbine doesn't spin with your finger. Like I can't spin that turbine with my finger. I don't know if that's because there's not oil pressure in it and it's just been sitting for a while.
Yeah, that's no good.
Yeah, that's what I thought. No good. So then I pulled off this turbo, or I pulled the engine out. So then I could see what was wrong with this turbo, which it was getting like a low boost pressure code. Yeah. So I knew something was up with it. So whenever I pulled this turbo off, this wastegate was just stuck wide open, which it's like normal state is closed. And then it opens up with the pressure. So I did like a little mix match here. As you can see, this doesn't have any like linkage on it.
Yeah.
So I took the good linkage for the wastegate because it was nice and tight and everything off of the new 26,000 mile turbo that I think is like seized up. And then I swapped that. Like I swapped this whole thing with the arm over onto the old turbo. And this one spins fine and it has like no play.
Sounds a lot better.
Yeah. So
that Frankenstein turbo.
Yeah. So I think that's gonna be the solution. So I'm a little mad at myself because I tried to spin that thing with my fingers when I went to buy the engine and I couldn't spin it. And I thought that was weird, but
you didn't think of anything of it at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the guy was honest. I think it just was sitting for a long time. Like I think it actually is 26,000 miles. I think it was sitting, and I think it was also sitting outside for a little bit, so yeah, that doesn't help either. Now I'm at the stage where I just need to swap everything over onto the new engine. What is up, YouTube? Back in the garage. It's the next weekend. This engine has been sitting here doing nothing for a week. I was on a work trip in Idaho, so, and I'm from PA, from Pennsylvania, if you didn't know that. Now I'm back, and I started working on this engine again. So what I went ahead and did first was install my new timing chain kit from ECS Tuning. So new guides, new chain, the old style chain, which was on this engine, they have a tendency to stretch. So I installed the new style chain, new style tensioner, which is less likely to fail. The old ones start leaking oil and basically lose their tension. So everything's back together, back in time, double checked it. So now I can start putting the covers back on. The last thing I needed to do, which I already did, was the cam bridge, which kind of bolts onto the cams, keeps them where they need to be, has a little screen. There's a little valve in here, ball valve, that has a screen which filters oil that goes through it. I pulled mine apart and found this piece of the screen right there. That was off, that was broken off. So luckily it was just contained in there and it didn't, get through the system. But what I started reading is that you're supposed to remove those screens anywhere you find them, really, because they tend to fail. So what I did is I just took a little screwdriver, got in there and pried out the rest of the frame of the screen. So did that, got it all cleaned up. And then they say just to check that ball to make sure, you know, it doesn't seem like it's going to pop out or anything, which I don't really know how to check that, but I did as best I could. So now that is ready to go back on, and we're going to get this engine all put back together. And then it's time to just start swapping components over from, I'd say it's a higher mileage engine, but because the new engine has been sitting outside or was sitting outside for a while, a lot of the components on this higher mileage engine are actually in better shape. Plus, you know, the updated intake manifold and a lot of the updated components on the newer car. So I'll probably end up using a lot of these parts, and then I'll just have the other ones as spares. And the one last thing I did is, you can see I got my intake valves cleaned out. So I used a method that I found on YouTube where you put zip ties in a drill, and that does really well at cleaning out those valves. So because it's direct injection, there's no fuel going over the valves basically to help clean that carbon buildup and soot buildup. So I went ahead and did that, and the last thing I need to do is just clean off these dividers that go in there. So that'll be pretty quick, but I'll clean those up and stick them in there before I get my intake on. Yeah, I'll probably cue a time lapse. I want to get this done, and we're going to try to get this thing back in the car in this video. So here we go. So up next is the turbo. I'm gonna go ahead and get it on. I did get a set of brand new OEM nuts, and I am gonna put some anti-seize on them. So we're gonna go ahead and get the turbo on, and then that'll let us start getting the rest of the components on. All right, guys, as you can see, I cleared a path, got the old engine back out of the way, and the new engine is ready to go. It's all sealed up. Everything in this box is the remaining pieces that need to go on it. So time to get this thing off of the stand, onto the hoist. That way we can finish putting our transmission on and get it ready to install into the car. All right, guys, so before I get the transmission on, obviously I'm missing something. I'm missing the flywheel. So these DSG transmissions and these 2.0 engines use what they call a dual mass flywheel. So there's actually some springs inside of it. There's two pieces that kind of work together to create your spinning mass. Obviously, because there's some mechanics going on, those tend to fail. And even though the one that I had on my old engine did not fail, I did decide to go ahead and buy a new Luck replacement, L-U-K, which is a good replacement brand from what I know. And what happens is the two pieces and the springs get some play in them, and I'll show you the difference in the play. So a brand new one has some slop, so you can see the holes. Whenever I spin the two pieces together, you can see kind of how much they move. So that's normal. You can see how much these move with respect to the holes. So they're like, it's like double the amount of play. So that's one with 105,000 miles on it. Like I said, it wasn't bad. I don't think it was going bad. It wasn't, you know, I didn't have the symptoms of being bad, but this is something I don't want to have to do again, tear this all apart. All right, and then so finally, the last thing I'm going to do, the rear main seal doesn't look like was leaking on this engine, low mileage, obviously. But what happens is these stamped steel covers for the rear main seal actually tend to start leaking pretty easily. And the common, I guess, solution to that, and again, this is just some preventative maintenance, is this billet aluminum cover, which replaces the stamped steel one. So this should prevent any future issues with leaking. These are slightly pricey. This is one of the cheaper ones I could find on ECS Tuning. I'm just doing what I've found people recommend. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm sure this would be fine for a while, but again, preventative maintenance, don't want to have to open this thing up again once it's back in the car. So we'll go ahead and get this stuff installed. Moving along quickly here, I got the transmission on the engine. So this thing is about ready to put in. And also I went ahead, now that I got the starter on, I went ahead and pulled the plugs and coils, and I actually hooked up this battery with some cables, and then I tested each cylinder for compression. And this engine is definitely healthy. I had my doubts since it was kind of gross and it was sitting outside, but compression was reading 170 to 180 PSI on all cylinders. So that is looking great. This engine actually, even though the one cylinder was almost dead, the other three only had like 150. So, you know, I think 180 is about the proper spec from factory. So, you know, it gives me more faith that this is a low mileage engine and that it should run great once it's in the car. So, yeah, I don't want to talk too much because I do want to get this thing in the car and get this thing running because I'm excited to be able to drive it. So, yeah, probably cue the time lapse, cue the music. Let's get this thing going. of my cars are manual. It's gonna be so nice to drive an automatic. Just for something different. Also, this thing rips. This Stage 1 APR tune. Like, dude, this thing probably weighs about the same as the RX-8 with just slightly less torque now, which is absolutely crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing, honestly, especially with the grip right now of both of them, this thing is probably way faster than the RX-8, which is absolutely nuts to think about. But this thing's running great. No lights are on. Yet. This is the nicest car I own now. It's gonna be a daily, and it's gonna be great. So, I'll do a few more rips and then that'll be it. Thank you guys for watching. This thing's good, dude. It's so comfy. Dude, automatics are so boring, but it's so, that shift on the DSG is just so quick.